So today our talk is From Silicon to Screen, the impact of the computer hardware of virtual production. And during this talk, the hope is that there's a lot of terms and ideas that are going to spark your imagination or your own plans. And I encourage you guys after this not only to speak to the experts that we have here on stage, but also to talk to all the great View studio employees that are here, because they love to talk. If Tanner's here, I know Tanner loves to talk, so he'll definitely want to talk to you guys about that. So please, I encourage you to talk to them, because they're a big resource on top of this. Okay, so let's introduce our panelists. I'm going to start with, he is the Vice President of Research and Development at View Studios. His ultimate goal and focus is to provide solutions on virtualization, networking of studios, and remote operations. He is the man that created the room with the view. It's Alvin Tevez. All right, and then next to me here, he has an extensive background in the video game industry and uses that knowledge with Puget Systems to do good and to tune workstations to specific workflows, from virtual production to 3D rendering to asset creation and animation. He is our workstation wizard. This is Kelly Shipman.
Hello.
All right, and then last but not least, definitely not shy, I found out, serving as Director of Developer Relations for AMD, helping AMD understand and deliver the best products to support the creator space. We have our hardware guru.
Oh, no,
John
these
Tannen.
guys are the gurus. I'm just holding down this side of the bench.
Our hardware whisperer.
Oh, yeah, there.
Okay, real quick before we start, let's get a pulse on people's experience with the computer hardware. So show of hands, who has extensive knowledge of the computer hardware used for virtual production? Great. Who is looking at this as an introduction to computer hardware? All right, this is awesome. So with that in mind, I'll start with you. What came about, you know, The Mandalorian came out, we were in the Pandy, your Jedi mind magic, and you were like, I can see it. I can see where this is going. I can see it for all the creators. I can see how this could work as a new form of storytelling. When you decided on that, how did you come up with the first workflow when it came to technically making it happen?
So in the beginning, it's actually, there's no other information that you can find about virtual production. If you look at LED like 2 years ago, it's nothing. It's probably give you something like that. Right? And then when The Mandalorian came out, and I started studying about it and looking at the components of the system that they're using, a lot of it are very available to us. So the software, the sports use the computer hardware itself, like anyone, at one point build a computer. So I'm like, this is something that I could do. I should probably learn how to use the 3D outside of engine. And then that's where it started. And I started learning how to apply and create some of the basic 3D. But also the hardware part of it is part of me being a technical in film. I was like, okay, I like this. I like to put my GPU together, my CPU, and my case and stuff. So yeah, that was the beginning for that.
And it was a perfect situation with the pandemic, because here you are being able to pursue all those things the way you love to pursue them. So you reached out to Kelly. Tell me how that kind of came about when putting together that workflow.
Yeah, I can't remember if it was Gabby introduced us or another one of our partners that we worked with. Yeah.
And what was the question when they presented the problem to you? How did you see it when they came with your background and your experience? How did you see this idea?
Right. So we kind of started developing into virtual production in parallel to when they came to us, because we saw the same thing with Mandalorian. I was on board as kind of a game development expert, and have been working with game agents for several years. But we also have this huge background in filmmaking, video editing, and all that kind of stuff. And so as we saw kind of these two things joining together. We just kind of put our efforts that way. But then it was kind of fortuitous because there's some of this workflow that we can't replicate in our lab. Like, we don't have access to these giant LED walls. It's kind of hard to simulate. So we were able to do a lot of it, but then we're looking for a partner that did have that expertise. And we could take the hardware, they could take the rest of it. And it was about the same time that Vue reached out to us, and then we just kind of formed up to like use the knowledge from both sides.
That's interesting. So I never thought about that. So we always think, when it comes to this, we always think the filmmaker side of things and the opportunities for us. The opportunity from a video game developer perspective is actually just as incredible, because you're telling me that as video game developers, you're living in a space, and now you're able to take that space out and work on it in physically, right?
Correct. Yeah, there's a huge opportunity for game developers because this is a game, like real-time stuff is new to the whole filmmaking area, film industry. And there's a lot to be learned because filmmakers are used to taking high quality assets and just throwing them in a render engine and let the render thing go as long as it needs to. But that doesn't really work in real time.
Right.
And so there's a lot of optimization that needs to go hand in hand with your scene to make sure it works just right. And so for a game developer, that's a huge opportunity to like be able to step into this new field and be like, hey, I know how to do that.
Okay.
And just run with it.
Okay. So for all of you guys, I know there's an introduction level here. The landscape of virtual production workflow, it kind of goes in 6 sections. So you have your content creation, you have your computer hardware, you have your media server, you have your calibration, and then you have your virtual production, the designs and whatnot, and then you have post. So
I'm gonna have to cry umbrage.
What do you have to?
The interesting thing is you have to know what the hell you're going to shoot and why. Virtual production is yet another tool, right? In-camera VFX, another tool. When it was really going gangbusters, the Mandalorian introduction, it was the hammer for everyone's nail. They were like, oh my God, we can use virtual production to solve world hunger, world peace, feed children, and make productions. What people forgot, and we always have to come back to, is what are you trying to shoot, and is this the right tool for the job? So the beginning of that chain is, this is a powerful tool in the hands of good. Luckily, Kelly's good. But it's also a different workflow, as we were, you're starting to point out. It's got different needs. It works in some cases. The things that we were doing 2 years ago in virtual production, I would almost say a lot of it's been scrapped, redone, new tools, new ideas, new problems. Some of this is really an evolution of the tech along with the art.
That's a good point, John. That was in order, but content creation and the computer hardware, I do think those at the very top are the most important parts there. And to John's point, you do need to know what you're going to create before you can use the tech appropriately. Speaking of the tech, Kelly, so take me back to this first workflow. Let's get tactical, what were the needs for the computer hardware to achieve this project?
Right, so one of the needs that virtual production has that you don't see in other workflows is the ability to synchronize all the different walls, because there's going to be usually 3 to 7 nodes to power an LED wall, depending on the size, how many pixels, and a bunch of other factors. But all those systems then need to render at exactly the same time. That needs to be synchronized, the frame rate of the wall to the camera to make sure there's no tearing, and there's all these other things that need to happen that the typical game workflow would never experience this kind of thing. That's usually just pushing out to one monitor as fast as it can. It doesn't matter. So the need for a more robust system, because these are going into racks, and I'm going to be running much longer, much more demanding workflows, because these guys push content that really stresses the computer, even at the highest end of computers that we build, really pushes it. So there's this need to how do we get all these things to sync together? How do we get the absolute most performance we can from each of these nodes? and just developed this whole new workflow around that.
Okay. John, what are some of the hardware options for this when that was first brought to you?
It's actually an ongoing, interesting question. Again, I think as people started off with this, I ran into a group today. They were like, you grab a Threadripper, two A6000s, it's your LED production system. What's interesting though is the evolution of that. What is your hardware doing? What is it supporting? What kind of walls is it supporting? And then that ecosystem of content production to content delivery, right? And I think the interesting thing is talking about a system that is a remote access system that you guys built, that you guys are running, that's in our booth, might be different than what's that rack around the corner. Mm-hmm. And, AMD, we make CPUs, we make GPUs, but one size does not fit all. And it's what's the workload. And that's where, frankly, if you're a content creator out there, this is a question you should not have to answer. That's when you turn to these guys and you say, okay, here's what I'm trying to do. And then these guys decide the hardware and software combination that supports that workload, that content creation.
Right.
Because it might be a server product. Mm. It might be an EPYC server processor because it's got so many PCI lanes. It may be Threadripper because he wants every core possible. And it's a combination of this, right? It's virtual production. If we step back and just talk about the software and the creation stack, it's a layer cake of what are you trying to make, where are you trying to display it, what is it going to be doing, how long is it going to be running.
Exactly. So Alvin, to that point, what was the first type of project you guys used this workflow for? Do you remember what it was?
So at the beginning, as technical in film, I started building my the render that we have in Fabric. I'll build my own computer. I have my first computer in the studio to test it out. And then as you do this sandbox with virtual production, you're trying out different workflow. I got to the point that I'm going to need someone to help me push this technology so I can keep the creative side of it. I know I understand the basis of it, that this is a tool for a filmmaker. Now I want to be able to focus on other things around the studio and find people that can help me, that I can rely on. And that's when the workflow with gets in. I know that I have Puget with us if there's a problem, or if there's a benchmark that we have to pass, if there's a new system requirements that we need to do that they help us.
And Kelly, do you remember what the first type of project was once you installed that system?
Was it Vegas? Okay, so yeah, the studio here in Vegas. Okay. That's a 5-node.
And did you guys use it for like a TV commercial, a film, a short film? Yeah. What was exactly the type you used it for? Because it's interesting with virtual production, we're still trying to figure out exactly what's the best use case for it. So I'm very curious, what was the first one you tried this workflow with? And how did it end up? What were the immediate sticking points about it?
We mainly focus on the short form product of virtual production, that's commercial or short film. I would say that is the first time, and that's pretty much most of our production is in that side. I don't think if there is enough difference in terms of like the scale of production. There might be in some specific in terms of like a different types of tool that you would use for a long format, but in terms of the rendering aspect of it, it's pretty much very similar in terms of the end display part of it.
Okay.
There is some other media server there, like this guys that would put together a system for you.
Okay.
But for us, knowing and using the sandbox, like traditional setup, allows us to understand the same system and also allow us to explore more opportunity in virtual productions. And let's try this setup, let's try that setup, let's add this. And
right.
I think the virtual production is still pushing it in the edge of the technology. So I think having that capability of allowing us to have this sandbox right now
right.
is very important.
So in that first commercial test, what was the one thing that frustrated you guys the most? That, like, when was the first time you had to go back to the drawing plan and come up with a new workflow? Kind of give us a little tactical kind of view on what that looked like and how you solved it.
I wasn't involved. So.
I think for us the synchronization is a big one. I think it's a lot of people that's in traditional filmmaking, and then they go through virtual production like us. It's like, okay, now I have to sync this. Which one is the most capable generator that we could sync? What is the process for this? How do you set it up? So there's a lot of those questions. It's a lot of trial and error, but yeah, synchronization is one of them.
Yeah, I was going to say it's like time code on steroids, right? The interesting thing to think about an LED stage is, from a traditional stage, is it's a lot more IT intensive, right? I mean, it's as opposed to hanging lights and this is now going to require networking infrastructure. Heavy networking infrastructure, and you have to have that understanding. I think that's where Vue has a really progressive view on it. Wow, sorry, didn't mean to do that one. Because some people are going to be able to have a stage, but then you have to hire people to run that stage, and the kinds of operators running that stage are a different set of expertise than what you would find in a traditional sound stage. So where do you find that experience? How do you do it? And let's face it, are you shooting that kind of production all the time, or is it pop up, pop down? Are we using it for different reasons? And I think you guys can talk a bit more about that, but I think having that remote aspect, or that ability for another team to work on a highly technical, complex infrastructure, but not necessarily be there.
Yeah, Alvin and Kelly, I really like what John's saying about the it's how do you approach the thinking when it comes to the hardware? You have to change your thinking. How do we have to, for a lot of us here that are kind of introduced to this for the first time, what is your advice on how to think about this?
Sure. What I always tell people that come to us is to, everyone knows that the GPU is doing the bulk of the workload. But I always tell them to don't stop there and think you can just throw anything else in there. There's so much more. Also think about the system or the multiple systems as a platform. You want it to be agile. You can change as new technologies come about. You want to be able to use those nodes in different ways. We have some of our customers that will use these during the day for shooting in-camera VFX, and then at night they just turn that over into a offline 3D render node so that they can do rendering, because they have the same GPU and CPU that you would use for a traditional render node. So why not use that to the maximum? Some studios don't like to do that. We're also now seeing a potential shift to, with SMPTE 2110 coming out, that might change some different hardware requirements. And if you were just limited to this one static system, you wouldn't be able to adapt to these new technologies.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Kelly, what's SMPTE 2110?
Oh, that's an excellent question. So it's a broadcast
standard.
There we go. I guess that's the S for SMPTE, is standards. So it's a broadcast standard for transmitting high definition video over IP. So basically, there's a potential that if that takes over, that we'll use network to transmit the video instead of your DisplayPort or your HDMI.
And SMPTE 2110 also has as with all SMPTE standards, and part of that is a signaling protocol. Mm-hmm. So as we look at when we say time code and what you think of traditional time code, what is the evolution of that into much more of an Ethernet IT-based infrastructure synchronization? And SMPTE 2110 is one of those areas that people are starting to lean into.
Okay, so with the current workflow that, Alvin, you have with you in y'all studios, what is the hardware, specifically products, what are the ones you guys are relying on right now?
So for our, it's ever changing. I feel like every time we build a studio, we try to keep it the
depends.
same. Yes, it depends on it and where we at in virtual production. But the render nodes are the same, pretty much the traditional 4U rack. The components might be updated. We start working with 10 gigabit network and move into a 25 gigabit backbone and added a NAS with all solid state in that to be able to transfer that. But then also that workflow changed because we now wanted to be replicated all the files locally in the machine. So you might not need the high-speed networking anymore, but here comes again the 2110 coming in that might need a Mellanox or NVIDIA RiverMax for that capability. So it's always changing in that way, and I think having that ability to shift around, we need to put a PCIe lane, make sure that you have enough PCIe lane for that one. So if you have to update that, or you need another PCIe if you want to keep all the media on locally in the server, make sure that you have enough room for growth in the future. So I think that's what it gives us in that workflow.
Yeah, we kind of tend to default to Threadripper Pro for that reason, because it has just a massive, yeah, this was not paid for him. It just has a massive amount of PCIe lanes, so it's more than you would ever need for any of the productions. Every lane on the motherboard is full speed 16x, so no matter what hardware you need to put in, if you need to like go to 2 GPUs or just one, or you want to add in a new DPU for 2110, you can put that in there. It doesn't matter what lanes you put in there. Everything's going to work. You can reorder your GPUs if you need to. So that makes it a nice, flexible platform to be able to keep up with all these various changes.
So as we're kind of closing out this talk, I've got two questions on the future of where the next workflows can go and where the next problem solving can go. Where are the opportunities for innovation with the workflow and products you guys are using?
Probably like we've already mentioned, 2110 is kind of the next thing that is on people's minds. A lot of kind of research going on to that. How does that work? What's the best hardware to put with that? Because NVIDIA has a ton of different DPUs available. I think that's the next one that I'm aware of.
Go for it.
I think for me as personally, I think the virtualization of it, or consolidation, I would say, rather than managing multiple machines, it's going to be consolidate to a smaller setup that would house multiple GPUs in them, or that has enough lanes to be able to pass through all the GPU in that and each virtual machine. So that way it's a lot easier to be able to manage the clusterization of the system. So because it sometimes it could get really tricky trying to manage all of them, especially in the multiple studios.
Yeah, I think there's, in addition to the ones you mentioned, and those are biggies, color science, right? As we look at these walls, the evolution of these walls, we didn't talk about, you mentioned calibration. That's like the one word to a epic nightmare of pain.
Yes.
Getting a wall calibrated, getting the color space right, the interconnect and the signaling protocols amongst the camera gear, the walls. What's driving the walls is that next area, and content generation, right? We talked about Unreal, we talked about a real-time engine driving this, but the evolution, some folks are like, I just need a static plate on that. Where's that static plate come from? And I think the aspect of that where, do I have to go hire an Unreal artist to just create a scene? And so a lot of the vendors out there are creating those stock, if you will, footage that you can modify. You'll see some productions where you're like, wait, I think I recognize that for a scene. They just move some things around. But, that's evolving, right? To make this production pipeline smoother and more efficient.
So, a lot of people here, like I said, they're having this intro to it. What are some of the terms that kind of maybe have been invented because of the correlation of these hardwares? I know brain bar is one that's
ICV VFX.
Okay.
In-camera VFX, right? That's one, the buzzy term, if you will.
Yeah, I'm kind of glad for ICVFX because at the beginning, everything was referred to as virtual production, and virtual production actually entails a whole bunch of different disciplines and stuff, and they don't always have the same hardware requirements. They don't have the same needs. And so people would come to us and be like, "Hey, we need a computer for virtual production." And I was like, "Well, that didn't tell me anything." So I'm glad that ICVFX has kind of taken off as this versus like doing motion capture is completely different.
Okay, so as creatives come to Puget Systems for advice, what would you recommend they approach their questioning?
To get really specific about your workflow, because there's going to be a big difference. A lot of people come to us, they're just saying, I'm going to set up a LED volume. What kind of computers do I need? And they don't even know their pixel pitch yet. They don't know how big the wall is going to be. And it's like, you need to like get some more information in yourself before you come to get the computer, because that's going to change a lot of what we're then going to recommend. So yeah, really learning all these different workflows, all the different types of LED walls are available. Even checking with someone like View, because View does some consultation on how to set up their own system, as far as like the entire system, and then come to looking for the computer.
Got it.
I think just to add on top of that, I think it's nice to see that there's standards are coming along, because I think that's one thing that virtual production came in a little bit too fast, and people wanted this thing, and I think having standards like SMPTE 2110 or the color workflow or the actual workflow for pipeline for that from pre-production to production and post-production, I think I'm happy to see that, and I think that's what is going to make it easier for everyone in the future.
Yeah, I think it's, I've worked as a producer for many years. Part of what we've been doing at the Producers Guild is helping educate producers on what this workflow is, how to budget for it, how to think about it, right? How to allocate where you put the money. And that is something that it's constantly evolving. But, again, I've seen a lot of people go, I want to shoot on LED. Why? What problem is it going
it's
to...
hot. It's great. It's cool.
Yeah, it's cool. What problem are you solving with it that you can't do some other way? And it helps. You can do some amazing things with it. You can, like, we were talking about a production on the Brooklyn Bridge. It was shot on LED. Because have you tried to get permits to shoot on the Brooklyn? Yeah. Like, there's some very practical aspects of this, but it's asking the question, what are you trying to create? And then starting to talk to folks that know how to use the tool and say, oh, yeah, you need this or you need that. Again, you may not need a full real-time environment. 2.5D may work for you. Save you money. It's like, but those are the kind of things to start asking and know almost what you don't know.
I like that. Start with the content, be flexible. Is there anything else? We could talk for hours, but is there anything else left on the table, at least before we do questions, that are just as important as those things we mentioned?
I would say, let's find out what people want to know. Or unless you got something, you got a pearl of wisdom there, Kelly?
It looks like you do, Kelly.
I feel like I do. I just can't think of what it is, but I feel like there's something else I left out.
He's got so many pearls of wisdom, he just didn't know which one to tell you about.
Okay. Any questions? Anybody? Yes.
Wait for the mic.
Hi. So, since camera sensors and the
Could you
LED
bring your mic a little closer?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Since camera sensors and the LED panels both use pixels, do you find that when selecting the pixel pitch of either one of those two, you run into any problems with like aliasing or any other artifacts?
Oh hell yeah.
Yeah. What's your name? Sorry. Anna. Okay. So Anna brings up a great beginner question, because pixel pitch, that's the first thing we think of when we think of the LED display. So that's a great question.
Yes. And again, this is some of what was discovered early in the process where people start experimenting. You know, pointing, somebody's running around with a video camera, pointing a camera at one of these, you start discovering problems. That's where rules of thumb of shooting, how far your subject is away from the wall, pixel pitch, color, all of those things. Camera manufacturers are starting to now respond to that. I think the Blackmagic did something recently to one of their cameras to handle some of that filtering. Like, all of that is a learning process that everybody, as we bring this technology together, have started experimenting with. Yeah, a moire pattern problem, abso-frickin-lutely. But quickly people discovered, okay, we're distancing based on pixel pitch. There's now good math you can do. You know, people are putting out guidelines for that to calculate, you know, depth of field for those things. And again, what you're shooting, right? All of that factors in. The good news is there's a number of folks that are producing guides for that. Usually it's, here's the mistakes I've made, please don't make them. The ETC, Entertainment Technology Center out of USC, published an exhaustive white paper about their recent project that just goes into all of this stuff in pedantic detail. You know, of like, this is what we tried, this is what we broke, this is what didn't work. So looking for that kind of information is helpful.
That's a good paper. Any other questions? And also, is any of y'all thinking of doing a virtual production space? Are you guys in actual, you know, seriousness considering doing it? Or are you still kind of...
Or they were until they got to this panel and went, shit, that sounds really hard.
Wait, what? Yeah, sir. Tell us about your project.
Well, to tell you the truth, we actually have a relatively high-pitched wall that we just want to play around with. We got an interesting opportunity to play around with some content. I'm in charge of producing the content, and I'm going to use you know, low end across the board. For instance, like Vive trackers and such. To the point where I'm very familiar with another engine that does not bring up a lot here, but I'm a VR developer.
Just bring your microphone a little closer.
You can say Unity. It's okay. Yeah.
I use Unity, and I wrote like a fulcrum projection matrix modifier just to do the whole screen from point. So I'm really curious. I don't know. I actually just asked, and I just nodded. So I don't really have a question, but I'm really excited to get into it. And what am I going to learn about the moire pattern? What is the latency and lag or all these kind of things? So that's, I don't know, not really a question. But.
So a couple of more, like, kind of like on the onset, introductory problems to solve. What are some maybe resources or some of those things that you guys have experienced in the beginning?
So for the example a while ago, moire is always going to be there. And I think there is part of that traditionally is still applicable to this, like lenses. And I think the biggest part of virtual production that excites me about is loading the environment, grabbing the camera and putting it in there and seeing how it looks. How far can I look at this? It's always depends. It depends on the environment. It depends on the things that you're trying to shoot. But it always excites me to what am I going to discover when I'm inside the stage. It's always like there's always part that's very predictable, but there's also part that's very unpredictable. But some of those could be like a happy accident that would actually gives you so much, ideas and that you might not even think.
I'm going to bring up one thing. It's not visually oriented. Audio sucks on an LED stage. These are hard surfaces, especially when you get a nice curved stage. Oh my God, your audio guy or person or woman will hate you. Just warning you, because that sound bounces around like nobody's business. And we haven't solved that problem well yet. But just know, if you're a producer and you got something that's, you got a lot of dialogue, a lot of sound, like audio management on an LED stage is a problem.
One thing about that is lighting. The limitation of the volume right now. I mean, I've seen some panels here that could do RGBW, But right now, currently, it's still RGB. And I've seen this in the past that gaffer would try to match using the wall to match the scene environment that they currently have. But I always tell them that use a lighting source like a sky panel to actually match the one that you have on the wall because you have more latitude in terms of spectrum. So,
Kelly, did you get that
Yeah.
nugget back?
No, I didn't. It's probably gone now. But I was just going to say to address the gentleman, it's great that you're kind of experimenting because as far along as the virtual production industry has become, it is still extremely experimental. Like all the studios, no matter how big they are, they're constantly trying something new. They're constantly pushing the boundaries of what their volume, their computers, their cameras can do. And so as long as you are also in that same mindset and continue pushing, then that's going to give you a leg up against a lot of people that think they can just buy a turnkey system and it's all done and ready to go. So just constantly be experimenting.
That's is so important. This is by no means a set in stone one way to do it, and working with your financiers and management and saying, you know what, this isn't an exact science. This isn't the way we've been shooting and creating media for thousands of years. Or, well, hello, Eric Weaver. So if you need the white paper from USC, the ETC project, the guy in that funky little hat right there is the guy to talk to. Just pro tip, talk to him.
Okay, any other questions?
Hello.
Mic up, Mike.
Yeah, bring the mic
Can you
closer.
guys hear me? Okay. So my question is, are there any tools out there for cinematographers for calibrating the LED screens for their camera's specific color profile?
You trailed off, but I think it was tools for cinematographer for calibration.
Their camera's specific color profile.
To calibrate specifically for the LED volume?
yeah, so right now the workflow for Unreal Engine, there's OpenColor IO that being implemented. That's implemented in the end-display workflow, and the tricky part with this is it's not just the camera itself. It's the entire spectrum of the system itself. Like the LED needs to be able to output certain color range, and the processor needs to support certain signal, and the computer is part of it in the Unreal Engine. There is the OpenColor IO that helps you calibrate the color pipeline for it. I'm not sure if that's specifically the one that you're asking. But there's some other tools in virtual productions like utilizing it as a light card. I'm not sure if that's part of the question, but those are the things that I find it very fun, and then it's always amazing to explore because there's so many tools that you could do in the volume, like setting up a 20 by 20 in a matter of like 5 minutes compared to a traditional setup.
That's good.
You good, John?
No, I got nothing.
Okay, so guys, unlike John, I think for a lot of us now, we're more excited to dive into it than scared. I think you guys have pulled back the curtain a little bit on the hardware. So I just want to thank you guys for sharing. And yeah, guys, let's go out there and create some stuff.
Let's do it.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. Thank you, everybody.